The most profitable business the New York Mafia ever ran wasn't drugs. It wasn't gambling. It wasn't loan sharking. It wasn't extortion. It was garbage. Rotting fish guts. Grease-slicked cardboard. Restaurant waste crawling with flies. The kind of material that nobody wants to see, smell, or think about. For 40 years, the five families of New York built a $2 billion empire out of the one thing every business in the city produced every single day and had absolutely no choice but to get rid of. And the most extraordinary part? It was completely legal. Or at least, it looked that way on paper. Picture this moment first. 1992, Brooklyn. A garbage transfer station. An NYPD detective named Rick Cowan is interviewing a businessman named Sal Benedetto about threats against his company. Two men walk in, mob-connected, angry, there to intimidate. Sal Benedetto makes a split-second decision. He points at the detective and says, "That's my cousin Danny." Rick Cowan looks at the two men, doesn't flinch, extends his hand. From that moment, for 3 years, Rick Cowan becomes Danny Benedetto. He infiltrates the most sophisticated garbage cartel in American history. He wears a wire to mob meetings. He sits across from men who would kill him if they knew who he was. He records everything. By the time it is over 100 mobsters are indicted. A $2 billion criminal enterprise collapses. And garbage collection prices in New York City fall by 40% overnight. But to understand what Rick Cowan walked into, and why it took 40 years for anyone to stop it, we have to go back to 1956, to a change in city law that nobody paid attention to, and an opportunity the Mafia seized before the ink was dry. For decades, businesses operating in residential neighborhoods in New York City had their garbage collected for free by the city's Department of Sanitation. It was a quirk of the system, a loophole. Nobody thought much about it. Then in 1956, the city closed it. Overnight, 50,000 businesses across New York City needed to find someone to collect their garbage. Restaurants, factories, office buildings, warehouses, 50,000 customers, with no hauler and no choice but to find one fast. The Mafia was ready before the law had even taken effect. All five families moved simultaneously. The Gambinos, the Genoveses, the Luciuses, the Bonanos, the Colombos. Each family claimed territory. Each family installed its people in the trucking unions and the trade associations that governed the industry. And then, they built a system so elegant in its criminal logic that it would take 4 decades for law enforcement to fully understand what they were looking at. They called it the property rights system, and it was the foundation of everything. Here is the concept that made the garbage empire possible, and it is worth understanding exactly how it worked, because nothing like it had ever been built before. Under the Mafia's property rights system, a customer did not choose their garbage hauler. They were assigned one. The moment a business opened in New York City, it belonged to whoever the cartel designated as that stop's owner, not the business owner. The hauler. The stop was the hauler's property. The business was an asset. Tradable, sellable, inheritable. If the business moved, the new tenant automatically became the same hauler's customer. If the business closed and a new one opened in the same location, same hauler. The customer had no say. The customer had no choice. There was no competing bid. There was no negotiation. You paid what the cartel told you to pay, or you dealt with the consequences. The consequences were not subtle. A restaurant owner in Queens who tried to switch haulers found his tires slashed the next morning. A factory in the Bronx that contacted a non-carteller had its loading dock set on fire. A business in Manhattan that complained about rates found 2 men waiting for the owner in the parking garage when he came in to work. The threat was never stated. It never needed to be. The message traveled through the city like a current. You don't own your garbage. We do. The pricing structure of the garbage cartel is where the scale of this operation becomes genuinely difficult to process. New York businesses were paying $14.70 per cubic yard of garbage collected. In Philadelphia, the same service cost $4.25. In Chicago, $5. In New York, $14.70. A single stop, one business, might be paying $60,000, $70,000, $90,000 a year for garbage collection that should have cost $15,000. The World Trade Center was paying $3 million a year to have its garbage collected. After the cartel was broken, that number dropped to $600,000. A single stop that had been generating $94,000 a year in cartel revenue was taken over by a legitimate competing company for $5,000. The cartel contained over 100,000 customers, spread across 300 hauling companies. Most of those companies were small. Fewer than 5 trucks, fewer than 10 employees. Family businesses, often started by Italian immigrants with a single cart decades earlier. By the 1980s, The combined revenue flowing through this system was conservatively estimated at $1.5 billion annually. The Department of Justice calculated that the mob tax the premium New York businesses were paying above market rate amounted to $45 million in excess charges every single year. Every restaurant that bought you dinner paid it. Every office building where you worked paid it. Every hotel where you stayed paid it. A tax on the entire commercial life of New York City. Invisible, inescapable, running for 40 years. A system this profitable requires protection. The Mafia's garbage empire was protected by three interlocking mechanisms, each one reinforcing the others. The first was the unions. The Teamsters Local 813, the union representing garbage truck drivers in New York, was controlled by the Gambino family. A hauler who tried to operate outside the cartel system found that his drivers suddenly couldn't work. Union problems, inexplicable delays, workers who showed up and then left. A non-cartel hauler couldn't keep a truck running because the men who drove the trucks answered to people who had no interest in seeing competition survive. The second was the trade associations. 4 trade waste associations operated in New York City, the Association of Trade Waste Removers of Greater New York being the most prominent. On paper, they were industry bodies, professional organizations. In reality, they were mob-controlled gatekeepers. They collected dues. They set prices. They assigned territories. They adjudicated disputes between carters over who owned which stop. They were the administrative infrastructure of the cartel, providing it with the appearance of legitimacy while enforcing its rules through the back door. Any carter who stepped outside the system had their membership revoked, which meant they lost their union access, which meant their trucks stopped running. The third was violence. Not constant, not random, but present enough that nobody who understood the system ever forgot it was available. Trucks were firebombed. Business owners were beaten. A manager at a recycling company who tried to operate competitively was attacked with a 2x4. An executive at a national waste management company that attempted to enter the New York market arrived at his office one morning to find a severed dog's head on his desk. The message was clear every time. This city belongs to us. May 1992, Brooklyn. Rick Cowan is a detective in the NYPD's Organized Crime Investigations Division. He is investigating a truck bombing at a garbage transfer station. The bombing was a message from one cartel-connected company to another, a warning about territory. While Cowan is at the facility interviewing the owner, Sal Benedetto, 2 men from a rival hauling company walk in. They are there to intimidate, to make clear that certain boundaries should not be crossed. Sal Benedetto makes a decision in under a second. He points at Cowan and introduces him as his cousin Danny. The men look at Danny Benedetto. Danny Benedetto looks back, doesn't blink, extends his hand. When they leave, Sal Benedetto turns to the detective and says, "I think they bought it." For the next 3 years, Rick Cowan is Danny Benedetto, manager of Chambers Paper and Fiber, cousin to Sal, a man with an accent, a cover story, and a recording device. He attends mob meetings in back rooms and social clubs across the city. He sits across from men who have killed people, men who would kill him if they knew the truth. He listens to them divide territory over espresso. He records their conversations about which stops belong to which family. He hears them laugh about competitors who were dealt with. One wiretap captured a Lucas-connected enforcer describing what happened to a carter who tried to undercut rates. The enforcer thought it was funny. It was not funny. Cowan wore a wire to dozens of meetings. He built relationships with men who trusted him completely. He collected evidence that would take years to fully process. And, the entire time, one wrong word, one face he didn't recognize, one moment where someone checked a story he had told, and Danny Benedetto disappears. The investigation was described by the NYPD as the largest and most complex organized crime case in the department's history. When the indictments came down in 1995, over 100 people were charged. The evidence was overwhelming. The recordings were damning. Most of the defendants pleaded guilty rather than face trial. The cartel that had operated without serious interruption for 40 years collapsed in a matter of months. The numbers that followed the cartel's destruction tell the story better than any courtroom testimony. Garbage collection costs in New York City fell by 40%. The World Trade Center went from $3 million a year to $600,000. One business that had been paying $94,000 a year saw a legitimate competitor bid $5,000 for the same service. After the investigation, commercial waste collection costs across the city dropped by an estimated $600 million annually. $600 million every year. That had been the mob tax. That had been the premium that every business in New York had been paying, silently, invisibly, without choice, for 4 decades. The city created the Business Integrity Commission, a regulatory body specifically designed to license waste haulers and prevent the cartel from reassembling. Background checks on all applicants. Ongoing monitoring. A list of individuals permanently barred from the industry, and yet, in 2013, 18 years after the original indictments, 30 people were charged in New York for running a new garbage extortion ring. Members and associates of the Gambino, Genovese, and Lucchese families, same structure, same property rights system, same enforcement methods. The names had changed, the machine had not. The garbage empire lasted 40 years. It generated an estimated $2 billion in revenue at its peak. It touched every commercial business in New York City. It was paid for by every restaurant customer, every office worker, every hotel guest who ever spent money in the city during those 4 decades. Nobody knew they were paying it. That invisibility was the genius of the whole operation. The mob didn't need to threaten you directly. They didn't need to walk into your restaurant and demand cash. They just needed to be the only option when your garbage needed to go somewhere. And in New York City, garbage always needs to go somewhere. One detective named himself Danny Benedetto for 3 years and brought it down. But here is what Rick Cowan himself said after it was over. He said, "Control the flow of garbage, and just as surely as if you owned the supply of fresh water or electricity, you had an entire metropolis by the jugular. The garbage empire is gone. The Business Integrity Commission exists. The licensing requirements are real. The monitoring is genuine. But organized crime doesn't need the garbage industry anymore. It found new industries, new systems, new gaps between what is legal and what is profitable. The machine doesn't die. It just takes out the trash." The garbage empire was one of 19 revenue streams the New York Mafia ran simultaneously. If you want to understand the full scope of how they built their empire, watch our video on every way the New York Mafia makes money. The garbage is just where it starts.